We gather on a day of profound joy, of soaring hope, of renewed faith, and above all, a day to give our deepest thanks to the Almighty God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It should now be clear to everyone throughout the region that decades of fomenting terrorism and extremism, jihadism and anti-Semitism have not worked. They've been a disaster. They've just killed. They've killed. From Gaza to Iran, those bitter hatreds have delivered nothing but misery, suffering, failure, and death. Through glory and heartache, we have built industries together, we have made discoveries together, we have confronted evil together, and we have waged war together, and perhaps, most beautifully of all, we have made peace together. And this week, against all odds, we have done the impossible and brought our hostages home. The God who once dwelled among his people in this city still calls us, in the words of Scripture, the turn from evil and do good. Together we've shown that peace is not just a hope that we can dream about, it's a reality. It's an incredible triumph for Israel and the world to have all of these nations working together as partners in peace. This is the day that people across the region and around the world have been working, striving, hoping, and praying for. With the historic agreement we've just signed, those prayers of millions have finally been answered.
Good morning, everyone. I remembered to unmute myself this time. I usually forget. Good morning. I hope you guys are all having a great morning. Happy Tuesday. Good morning, Karen. Well, we have big news this morning. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. I feel like this is distressing news, so I'm just going to be out with it. The ceasefire has ended. You know, I was actually surprised, as I have said many times, that it lasted throughout the weekend. Excuse me. I hope I don't cough through the whole show today. I'm having some issues this morning with allergies. The ceasefire has ended, and it's kind of distressing, just because I had really hoped that the ceasefire would continue on, despite my lack of optimism over the situation. I had really hoped that I was wrong, and then just as I was coming in to the show, I saw the news report that the Israel Defense Forces said its troops opened fire on Palestinians, killing 5 after they allegedly violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Now, I don't know what they did. So I don't know what the Palestinian people did to violate the terms of the ceasefire. This is the only headline and story I have seen so far, and that is the IDF forces opened fire on Palestinians. They killed 5 after the Palestinians did something that has not yet been determined what that might be. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Kim. Good morning, Sherry. Oh, Sherry's in Austin today. Go down to Houston, Sherry, find out what's going on with those Bayou killings. We're going to talk about that later at the end of the show. But I'm sad to hear that the ceasefire has ended. I didn't expect it to last. In fact, I knew it wouldn't last. I think most of us probably, knew that that wasn't going to happen. And I don't know. It's hard to know what the real true story is, who started what, who did what first. But what's really unfortunate is a lot of these people, millions of them, in fact, have already returned home or are on their way to returning home. And I watched countless videos yesterday, kind of scanning through things after somebody made a comment to me about that. And, the video, and of course, yes, they're going to show you the videos that are hard to watch, no question about it. And some people say it's propaganda. Some people say it's real, life emotions. You can just, understand it however you want. But I watched this video, and of course, yeah, it was touching. It was a little boy who had returned back to his home. And when he returned, his home had been bombed. There was nothing left. 83% of the infrastructure of the buildings within the Gaza region have been completely destroyed. And so it's no question, a lot of people are returning to no home. And I have no idea where these, 2 million people are going to go. that are returning home to find that they no longer have a home. But this little boy was, what looked like the top story of a building. Now, why they allow these people to return to these areas, I don't even know anyway, because it has to be extremely dangerous because of all of the crumbling buildings and rock everywhere and everything else. But and this boy definitely should not have been up. He was probably, I don't know, 10 years old. He was up going through the rocks, and somebody was interviewing him. And yes, you could call it a propaganda piece. That's okay. But yet still true emotion. And the little boy was crying, and he said, well, he was looking for his grandparents. His grandparents had been left in the rubble, when they left, and he was trying to pull all these little bricks out, and he was on top of a mountain of them. There was no way he's going to find his grandparents, and God forbid that he did. And of course, it's hard to watch. I watched another video of a man, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years old, returning home, and he was, you know, just so joyous because his home had not, been hit by a bomb. It was still intact. And it is, yes, it's hard to see these videos. It's hard to see what these people are going through. And somebody made a comment. I made a post about, I don't even remember exactly what I made the post about. I made a post about the ceasefire, something to do with the ceasefire and the peace agreement, with Donald Trump. And I think I had talked about how difficult it must be for Netanyahu and, other Israelis or Israeli government to have their hostages back. Not only hostages, they didn't just return hostages. I haven't really heard it discussed too much in the media, but they also returned or are in the process of returning bodies, of hostages that perished in this process. And to see, I'm sure the Netanyahu and the Israeli government, to see some of their citizens that had been held hostage coming back in such terrible shape, and then some people say that's propaganda. So it really depends on what side you're looking at things on. But seeing the hostages coming back, talking about digging their own graves and being skeletal, fed very little, held underground in these tunnels. Yes, it's both sides. It's terrible. It's horrific. From a humanitarian standpoint, us as a human, not political beings, it's very difficult to see the carnage on both sides. I hate to see any lives lost, no matter who they are. It's just terrible. It's not how it was meant to be. It's just not how it was meant to be. And now to hear that the ceasefire has ended, it is upsetting. I know Donald Trump celebrated peace, and I'm sure he's very upset today to think that he went through, yesterday, and they signed the peace deal and expected peace, and here we are the next day, the next morning after the peace deal was signed, right back where we were, with violations of the ceasefire on both sides. And what's going to happen to these people who have returned back to their homes, and now what are they going to have to flee again? Is the bombing going to continue? We don't yet know. We don't yet know. And good morning, Michael, to you also. And yeah, Michael, I'm with you. I was hoping it would last. Good morning, Rob. It's very unsettling to know. And Donald Trump has to be furious this morning. Just furious. I'm sure he is. I don't know. He probably doesn't know who to be furious at, if the Palestinian folks violated the ceasefire first and Israel first. We don't know, and we'll probably never know. But I'm sure he is furious because that was a big deal that happened yesterday. He signed the peace deal. It's all on video. He met with all the world leaders. He's on the cover of Time. He was hoping to win the Nobel Peace Prize, which he should have received, by the way, for creating peace. And, he was at the top of his game yesterday, probably absolutely, ecstatic over creating this peace deal. And all of a sudden today, it's done. And again, quite honestly, I was shocked it lasted the weekend. They probably had to make it last the weekend so they could sign the big deal and go through the diplomatic processes. And then here we are back again today. And I've got a video, as a matter of fact, because Donald Trump is king at these types of meetings, and especially at this one, because he's the one who brokered the peace, between Israel and Hamas, however short lasted it may have been. And it was kind of funny because if you guys, I'm not going to play his entire speech or any part of his speech, actually. I've watched a few times. And it was kind of funny, though, that, do I have that video? I have saved a couple different videos. I don't know. Oh, I guess I didn't load that one up. But I had a couple of different videos, and it was kind of interesting watching everybody walk across the stage and shake Donald Trump's hand. From what I understand, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that Norway did not. They stayed in the back. They didn't even come up on the stage with Donald Trump. Keir Starmer, of course, UK from the UK, behind him, and Georgia Maloney. I love her. She's always she you can look at her and I'm not sure what term I'm looking for here, but she's very she's always moving around, her eyes going in different directions, and you can really read her very easily, and it's kind of funny. I'm going to show you this video and you'll see what I'm talking about. And this in this part of the video, Donald Trump calls Keir Starmer. Now Starmer thinks he's going to come up and speak, so he comes up to the podium to say a word, because of course he thinks he's top dog at this thing, which he's not. And then Trump's like, yeah, glad you're here. And then he steps back, and you can see the confusion on his face. You can see Georgia Maloney probably kind of laughing under her breath because they don't get along. So take a look at this here. This is so funny.
United Kingdom. Where's United Kingdom? Where's my friend? Where? Come here. Is everything going good?
Very good.
It's very nice that you're here. These people all came in like 20-minute notice, and I think it's fantastic. And we have so many others, and it's just so.
That's so funny. He told him, he's like, now I think Donald Trump was trolling him. You might have your own opinion on that, but he's like, oh, come here. Then he comes up there like he's going to give a word and speak. And Trump's like, hey, thanks for coming. So glad you're here. And they don't get along very well, from what I understand. Now, he seems like he's had a new love for Keir Starmer. I think a lot of that's just theater, because Donald Trump has never liked European leaders, other than Georgia Maloney, because she has always been on the side of Donald Trump and Elon Musk when Elon Musk was first buddy. Boy, don't we miss those days. But watching this was pretty funny. And I'm sure you guys all saw the handshake between Donald Trump and Macron. They have that little back and forth. Well, I shouldn't say back and forth. I think it's very one sided. I think Macron absolutely despises Donald Trump, absolutely despises him. Yes, Mandy, it was pretty funny. And so I had to laugh about it. I wish I had another video. It probably would have been too long to play either way, but it showed Donald Trump on the stage and each of those leaders coming by and shaking his hand. And you could kind of watch it and see who he had the better interactions with versus the least. But none of it matters anymore, does it? Because the ceasefire is over. Now, can they get it back? Can they get back in to a peaceful mode? I doubt it. I never expected that to happen to begin with. I think that we as humans, we can be very emotional, and I think that's what the situation here. People are acting with emotion, and it's instead of diplomacy. It's very difficult. I know there's going to be additional lives lost. I hate to even think about it, but I'm also worried about American lives. We worry so much and talk so much about the lives of all these different people in different countries. And yes, I care about their lives too, but I also care about American lives. And some of the things I've been hearing over the past couple days are very troubling to me. We've talked on the show countless times now about Tomahawk missiles potentially going to Ukraine. Yesterday, I played an audio clip of Donald Trump talking about Tomahawk missiles potentially going to Ukraine. And now I did some research. We don't have a lot of Tomahawk missiles. So we can't send Ukraine very many if that's a decision that's made. Now, there are people who say we've already sent the Tomahawk missiles. I don't personally believe that. I know generally the way things go is if you're hearing about it, it's already been done. I don't think that's necessarily the case here, because Russia's been very clear that Donald Trump, if you send Tomahawk missiles over to Ukraine, it escalates the situation. And yes, we are going to attack you on your own soil. That has been very clear from Putin this entire time. And good morning, Suzanne. So I don't expect that to be a decision that we take lightly, that we send these Tomahawk missiles. Now, that being said, again, the Pentagon, we only have I'm reading about 57 Tomahawk missiles that we were allowed to build this year. Now, at one point we had 127. Some of those were used in various missions, and I'm hearing that we're down to 57 right now. And so therefore the allotment for Ukraine is estimated to be somewhere between 20 and 50. And I need to go back, I guess, and rephrase that a little bit. We had 127. We used some of them. Nobody knows exactly how many we use and how many we have left. We only know that we've commissioned another, I believe it was 57 in 2025. So we're in the process of creating 57 in 2025. We only probably had a few left over from that 127 that we originally have. So now the proposition is that we'll send anywhere from 20 to 50 Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's not enough Tomahawk missiles to do a lot of damage to Russia. But, Colonel Macgregor, who I think you guys know, I absolutely adore, and I count on his advice. I don't know him, the advice he gives online, and he's going to talk about that. I'm going to show you that here in just a second. And Jay says, no one else is talking about broken ceasefire or any network that I'm aware of. Now, Jay, I'm going to tell you right now, don't doubt me. I promise you it's true. I promise you it's true. If they're not talking about it yet, they will be talking about it, because sometimes I get the news first because I get it from a lot of different people who are in the know. So I can assure you the ceasefire has been broken. And I will read you once again what was sent to me. The Israel Defense Forces said its troops opened fire on Palestinians, killing 5 after they allegedly violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement. I promise you that this is true. I would not report on it if it was not. And I can promise you the source that I have is a very good source. And a lot of times I do often, which is probably why I have the show and have been asked to be on other shows, often get the news before mainstream gets it. So take my word for it. If I'm wrong, I will certainly apologize. But the source that I have is a very good source. But back to Russia and Tomahawk missiles. If we send these Tomahawk missiles over to Ukraine, it's going to be a very serious situation. I've got a little video clip here of Colonel Macgregor. I'm just going to play a couple minutes of it, who's talking about, and again, I personally am not going to talk about nuclear war. I do not think that we're ever going to have a nuclear war. I think there are worse things that can happen, including the Oreshnik missile, far before we have any type of nuclear situation. But again, Colonel Macgregor talks about nuclear war. We'll see what he has to say.
If a Tomahawk missile lands in the outskirts of Moscow or Ryazan or Kazan or any of these places, he's going to be at war with Russia. And that war could rapidly escalate to the nuclear level. And once you hit the nuclear level, you have almost no control. We know that from experience in multiple war games, and everyone loses.
So, yes, everyone loses if we end up in a nuclear war. But again, I don't expect a nuclear situation. I don't think it's going to escalate to that. I think it's going to be a lot worse than that. You might think, well, how can it be worse than a nuclear war? Russia is very creative. They have a lot of resources. You look what they have done. People want to say, oh, they're losing this war. And that's the Democrats saying that. In fact, once again, as we've said 1,000 times on the show, had all of NATO not supported Ukraine, this war would have been over in a couple days. But here we have Russia fighting against all of NATO. We just keep sending weapons and money and aid and ammunition and training over to Ukraine to fight against Russia, and still Ukraine is and has lost this war. They lost this war almost as soon as it started. Russia is pretty well unimpeded, making their way very quickly through Ukraine. And so Russia is, whether you agree or not, a very powerful force. We do not want to be in a war with Russia. China, people say, oh, China's one of our biggest adversaries. And people want to say it. And I love that we are so American that we think our military is above all else. I love that. And I love our military. And I love our country, of course. But if we end up in a war, let's say against Russia and or China, not even necessarily them together. If we got in a war with China, we would be in a lot of trouble. Didn't you just hear me say that we're pretty much out of Tomahawk missiles? We don't have access to rare earth minerals without China giving them to us, making a deal with China, making a deal with Ukraine. We're in a very tough spot militarily. Now, Donald Trump has done a fantastic job bolstering our military. I know he's taken all these funds from the Pentagon to make sure that our military members are paid during this government shutdown. He's done everything he can to bump up missile production during his term. But guess what? The past 4 years under Biden, once again, our military became weak. prior to Donald Trump's first term in 2016, our military became weak under Obama. They focused far more on DEI and letting Indonesian women play cricket over in Indonesia. All the money we spent on these ridiculous programs that could have went to our military and did not. And so, no, as much as I love our military, we would have a very tough battle if we go to war against Russia, if we go to war against China, or God forbid, all of them together. I would hope that nothing like this would happen. I hope that Donald Trump, like I said yesterday, is just using these Tomahawk missiles as a negotiating tool. But if we send these Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, Russia is not going to take it lightly. Now, I don't think it matters whether we send 20, 50, or 500. I don't think they're going to take it very lightly. And I really hope that this is all theater, part of the negotiation process, and we're not really sending these Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Because if we do, I'm not going to say we're 100% going to have a war with Russia, because we know how these things work out. How many times, have we sent aid over to, and we sent those ATACMS missiles, remember, long range missiles over to Ukraine, and they used them against Russia. And Putin, it was probably very difficult, but he was able to maintain diplomacy. And I think at that time, though, that was under Biden. I think that he was biting his tongue, just waiting for Donald Trump to take office so that he knew that we would be back into a diplomatic relationship, and that Donald Trump would think about things very wisely. And he was correct, of course, on that. And the tensions eased quite a bit once Donald Trump took office. But it wouldn't take much, to rile things back up again. But I don't think Donald Trump wants war for the United States. Good morning, Linda. And Jay, let me know if you start hearing the mainstream news talking about the ceasefire. I promise you it's true. And so we'll the coming days will tell us everything we need to know, because now Donald Trump is going to have a new focus. The situation I think he's going to have to resign himself to is that the situation between Gaza, between Hamas, and I don't even know if Hamas is so much in the picture anymore. I think it's more between just the Palestinian people and Israel, because the Palestinian folks coming back to their homes, they have nothing left. There's no stores, there's no food. There's nothing, only a promise that we, the United States, and a couple other folks are going to step in and rebuild their country. Well, what are they going to live? I guess in tents and camps. There's no camps or tents set up. So, where are these people going to live? If you watch the videos, they're just hanging out in the street, amongst the rubble. There's really nowhere for them to go. I'm actually quite surprised that they even allowed them to return home when there's not much to return home to. But we also have to be careful of propaganda. Because if you recall the situation back in Syria, where you saw CNN camped out amongst the rubble, and the only thing they showed was buildings torn down, the white hats going in and rescuing children, bloodied children. And of course, that was all fake. It was all fake. What CNN did is they chose to set up camp in East Aleppo, which is where ISIS has sieged an area. And yes, of course, the Syrian government was heavily shelling that area because ISIS had taken it over. They had already chased out and killed, all of the innocent people, and had taken over that area. And if you went like one block over, people were at nightclubs and hanging out and having a good time, wearing jeans and their long hair free flowing. But CNN only showed the people running around in black burqas with these torn down buildings. So you have to be really careful when you watch these news reports and videos, because it is so much propaganda that's really difficult to know what's true and what is not true. So always take it with a grain of salt. Do lots of research before you form an opinion, because I don't know what's happening in the Gaza region. Obviously, I'm not there. It's very difficult to find journalists there. As a matter of fact, all of the journalists have been killed that were in the Gaza region. So there might be a couple new people who have come in. I kind of doubt it. So mostly you just have to count on citizens doing their own reporting. I can't recall how many journalists there were. One of you might recall, but they were all killed. And so there are no true journalists that were left. And therefore, when you see video, you don't know what it is you're seeing. Is it true, or can you go 10 blocks over and everything is nice and they've got grocery stores set up and everything's good. We don't know. Got to take it with a grain of salt. Good morning, Brenda. So we'll keep an eye on that situation as the day goes on, see if they can restore peace or if the ceasefire did break the peace agreement. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Some other things going on. Donald Trump, again, we talked about his Time cover. He's very angry. I don't blame him. Did you guys see that? The cover of Time? I posted it yesterday on social media. I'm going to show it to you here. His triumph, unfortunately, not to last. Donald Trump is not happy about this photo at all. And I have to say, I do not blame him. Of all the photos they could have taken, it's like, why that? Why would they do that to him? And no, of course he's not happy. His exact words is he said, Time magazine wrote a relatively good story about me, but the picture may be the worst of all times. They disappeared my hair and then had something floating on the top of my head that looked like a floating crown, but an extremely small one. Really weird. I never liked taking pictures from underneath angles, but this is a super bad picture and deserves to be called out. Why are they doing this and why? I would like to know too. And what he's talking about, and you probably can't really see it real well in this. Oh, yeah, Pam, they absolutely use that photo on purpose. No question. And if you look, there's Donald Trump's name is not on this cover at all. At no point do you see Donald Trump or President Donald Trump. His name is not on the cover. Now, if you look what he's talking about, the crown, if you look on the M and the E, you can see where part of the M and the E is wiped out. Now, I looked at this very closely this morning, and you can see what he's talking about with his hair is that was his hair. And he had a lot more hair going on here too. But for whatever reason, if you've done any editing, they took like a little scrubber tool and kind of blurred out his hair. You can kind of still see it in some photos. Now, why would they do that? And of course they did that because they wanted to show his neck in this way. They want to humiliate him. And yes, they absolutely did do it on purpose. It's wrong, really wrong. But what can we expect, right? They're not going to do anything good for him. And of course, they're not going to put his name on the cover. It's a miracle. I'm actually shocked they even put his photo, but he's been on the cover of Time, several times now. And yes, they wrote a good story, but very disrespectful on the photo. They could have used something much nicer than that. They chose that on purpose, just like you said, Pam. Very, very frustrating for sure. Despite the ceasefire being broken, Donald Trump did everything he could to create peace. There's no question about it. And as well, he's also working to create peace now with Iran. I didn't really see that coming, but he said that was his next objective. He's working with Russia, working with Ukraine, as we know. But the situation there is he has very little say what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, and that's because NATO is very much in charge of what's taking place in Ukraine, not Donald Trump. And so he's got very little input he can put into that situation. And I think that his goal is to try to salvage as much of Ukraine as he can so we can buy their rare earth minerals. But Russia is taking them by the day, seizing more land. And of course, they're seizing the land first that has the rare earth minerals. No surprise there. No surprise there. And so I was kind of surprised that he talked about this peace deal with Iran. Again, another peaceful situation that is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And I do wonder sometimes if Trump, and this is not a derogatory thing to say, I do wonder if if you see how Trump operates, he likes challenges. And on his level, not everybody gets to be a president. I might have my own challenges in life, gaining new business, keeping up with my schedule, getting new clients, different things like that. But on a presidential level, you have much bigger goals that you set for yourself. And it does make me wonder sometimes if he knows biblically, they talk so much about peace in the Middle East. If he wants to be that person that historically brings peace to the Middle East, because he's worked very hard to bring that peace. I know a lot of people are upset about Qatar, having involvement with a military base here in the United States. And I'm with you. While Qatar is very friendly to Donald Trump, there's a lot of people who believe that Qatar was behind 9/11. Is that true? A lot of people, of course, believe it was our own government that set up 9/11. So it really depends on what you think. But people are thinking, okay, we have enough problems with terrorism in our country. Why bring more terrorism into our country. And I don't know that the folks of Qatar are our friends. What I do know is that Qatar heavily donated to Hillary Clinton's campaign. So I am not so quick to say that they are our friends or that they are the friends of Donald Trump. Yes, they put on a great show for him. They welcome him into their country like unlike anything we've ever seen. But did they contribute to his campaign? You know, I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. In fact, I would say they probably contributed to Kamala Harris's campaign. So we've got to be very careful with Qatar and how far we let them go coming into our country. It could be another Trojan horse situation. We all know that story, right? We welcome them in, they act like our friends, and then they turn against us. I hope that does not happen. But as far as Iran goes, there's never going to be peace with Iran. When it comes to religious ideology, it's not a situation that you can change borders or talk your way out of it or diplomatically solve a problem. You know, these are religious, a religious ideology that goes back to the beginning of time, and it's not going to change. There's nothing we can do to change that. People who are of the Islamic faith, such as, and I'm not talking about the people of Iran. I'm not talking about the people of Iran. I'm talking about the government of Iran. The government of Iran has been largely infiltrated by the Muslim Brotherhood. Those people hate us. They hate Israel. They hate people like us. And that is never going to change. It's not going to change. The people of Iran is a whole different story. But the government of Iran, which is kind of funny considering we started that mess over in Iran, but those people, they're never going to like us. There will never be peace. I hope for Donald Trump's sake that he can make peace in the Middle East for all of our sake, but it's not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen. And if it does happen, I guess that's going to be the end of times, right? We'll just usher in the end of times right away. Another situation, we'll see how that works out, because Donald Trump's probably going to have a pretty serious reaction today to the end of the ceasefire. I should say a ceasefire violation, not necessarily the end of the ceasefire. And some of the other things I wanted to talk about today, more on a local level, is in Illinois. Governor J.B. Pritzker, as you know, he's a complete buffoon. I think we all know that, a complete buffoon. And Donald Trump promised that he was going to audit the state of Illinois. And, that's happening. These audits are taking place. And it's kind of funny because I watched this video this morning. I watched several videos about J.B. Pritzker, him telling Trump, oh, come and get me. I'm ready. Am I going to be arrested? Probably. Are the charges, am I going to be convicted? No. And so we'll see how that goes. I don't know if Donald Trump's going to take the time to come out. I think he might do it just for fun to have J.B. Pritzker arrested. And it would be pretty funny, quite honestly. But I don't see anything coming out of it. Like we talked about yesterday with Colonel Joe Adams. Yes, they're giving us, it's kind of like throwing peanuts to the people. Yes, they're giving us what we want, throwing us those little peanuts that, oh, Comey's under indictment. We're going to bring in Pelosi. We're going to bring in Shifty and all these other folks. Nothing's ever going to happen. None of these people are going to spend a single day in jail, and that includes J.B. Pritzker. But I do think it's interesting because they're coming after him. They really are. They're coming after him. I'm going to show you this video. And this video, it's Brad Holbrook. They are in Shelbyville County, Illinois, which is not too far from me. They've audited the funds, that some of the federal funding that comes into Illinois, and they have found that a lot of this funding is going to NGOs that support a lot of crazy things. And so we're going to play this video. It was kind of funny because I was watching the video. I'm like, I know that guy. So there's the guy standing right behind Brad Holbrook. And he's a really good friend of mine. I've known this guy for like 30 years. I didn't even know he was involved with any of this stuff. So it's kind of interesting video. I'm going to pull that up here because I'll tell you, if this is true, this is really going to cause problems for J.B. Pritzker. And of course,
I'm Representative Brad Holbrook of the 107th District of Shelbyville. Today we're turning our attention to a staggering amount of taxpayer money, over $1 billion, that's being funneled into political connected non-government organizations, or NGOs. This wasn't uncovered by government watchdogs, but concerned Illinoisans and Republican legislators that our grassroots effort we call DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency. Before we show you where the money's going, we need to ask one simple question. Why is government funding NGOs at all? First, there's no transparency. NGOs aren't subject to the Freedom of Information Act or FOIA. Taxpayers can't see how their money is being spent. Just last week, a lawsuit was filed because the state refused to release a contract detailing how much public money was being sent to specific groups. Second, the budget language is vague and on purpose. These grants are buried under broad terms with little or no detail. Lawmakers are being asked to approve funding without knowing how the money will be used or even who's getting it. Third, the Human Services budget has been hijacked. It used to mean helping seniors, helping single mothers, and people with disabilities. Now it's packed with programs for politically aligned groups offering vague services like parent mentoring, immigrant support, LGBTQ advocacy, and many are race or identity-based initiatives that serve political agendas, not real need. Fourth, this spending undermines real charity. Faith-based groups and private charities are being pushed aside while politically connected NGOs scoop up taxpayer dollars. The government is picking winners and losers.
Okay, so they are coming after J.B. Pritzker as promised. All of this federal funding coming into the state of Illinois, taxpayer dollars being misused, going to these NGOs. Remember when the Department of Doge was going through all these records, doing all these audits, and they found that these NGOs were often set up by governors, persons in Congress, their family members were setting up NGOs. These people have nothing to do with anything. It would be like my brother setting up an NGO if I'm the governor and me funneling millions of dollars into my brother's NGO and saying, oh, well, this NGO is to serve the LGBTQ community. It's for mentoring parents. And really, it's just stealing is what it is. It's just stealing. These NGOs were, a lot of them formulated, brought up, or I should say founded, just like a couple weeks to a couple months before Donald Trump took office. It was just a way for Democrats to steal money before Donald Trump came in and before he took office, before he shut down all of the ways in which they were able to funnel out and launder money. I kid you not, it is the truth. And Glenn says, what ceasefire ended? Glenn, at the very beginning of the show, I reported, I don't know if it's made it yet to the news, but I had reported that the ceasefire between Israel and Gaza had ended with the IDF killing five. I believe they killed, let me go back and read it. I don't want to misquote. Killing 5 Palestinians or opening fire. And let's see here. Sorry, I have it here. I just got to pull it up. Here we go. The IDF forces said its troops opened fire on Palestinians, killing 5 after they allegedly violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement. So they actually fired on, it says here, dozens of people, citizens in the streets. They killed 5 of them. And they claim that the Palestinians violated the ceasefire first, and they were just responding. I don't know if it's in the news yet. Somebody, Glenn, if you didn't catch that, said, well, I don't know if it's true. I haven't seen it in the news. It will be in the news. I promise you, if the ceasefire has been violated, whether it's ended is a whole different story, but it has absolutely been violated. It sounds like on both sides. And Mr. Parnell, it's all theater. Give them bread and a circus, and they will never stand up to revolt. NPR did a survey on adults believing the need for violence to take back control of the government. Only 1/3 agree that it is the way. You know, absolutely. And I hope no one ever condones violence. And we as conservatives, we know we're not the violent ones. I'm not saying that conservatives don't commit crimes or there's not conservatives or Christians in prison that have committed crimes. I just watched a story about the BTK killer the other day. That man was I think I talked about that yesterday, was the town dog catcher. And he was a Christian minister, but yet one of our more prolific and crazy serial killers. Yes, absolutely. Christians, conservatives can be violent, do commit crimes, but we are not the people who are out in front of the detention facilities, in front of attacking federal officers, ambushing police officers. You know, we're not out in the street harming innocent civilians. There might be a couple of bad apples in our ranks, absolutely. However, nothing like what we see on, and I'm not going to say the Democrat side. I really am doing my best to not divide between Democrats and Republicans, because I know there's a lot of good and bad on each side. It's the good and it's the evil. But I will tell you that on the conservative side, we have a lot less evil than the other side. And we have some liberals on the very far left fringe, and violence and chaos. That's the only thing they care about. But it's not necessarily organic. They're paid a lot of money to be violent. Now, yes, a few of them interspersed are, have that evilness in their heart, but a lot of them are just paid. And that's why it's so important what the Department of Doge has been doing, including the audit that we just talked about in Shelbyville, Illinois. And it shows again where this money goes, that all of your federal tax dollars, you're working your butt off. You can't even afford to eat food or pay your utility bills. People are struggling. And why? Because we're giving all of our tax money to the government. Our tax dollars, whether it's state tax dollars or federal tax dollars, they're all going into this big pot in which everybody has a hand, right? And they're taking that money, they're sending it to these NGOs, fake corporations, fake non-governmental organizations. It's all just a way to steal your money. But we've always known it. We might see validation of it, but you've always known that every time you get your paycheck and you're paying out those tax dollars, you've always known that that money is not going to your community. It's probably not even going to your state. It's probably not even going to your country. It's going overseas. That used to be the case. Now all of a sudden we have it going and being used to fund these groups who want to murder us, who come out and fight us, who fight police. And that's why the Department of Doge is so incredibly important, and the work that they did. But you know what? That ended too, didn't it? That ended too. Why? Because there was so much backlash against Donald Trump and his administration because of what the Department of Doge was doing. When Donald Trump took office, we came out strong. We came out really strong, remember? And I was absolutely ecstatic every day reading the Department of Doge. They've gone through this organization and this organization. They found, all of these different violations. They found all of this money that was misappropriated into these NGOs and other things. They found kickbacks and everything else you can imagine. And there were people who were let go. A lot of people lost their jobs. And, those first few weeks actually were just absolutely amazing. And then it all ended. And I have to say, since that ended, I'm not as happy anymore with the Trump administration. Still, Donald Trump is the absolute best president we could ever hope for. No question about it. I will never disagree with that. But there are things happening that I don't like. And I'm sorry if that upsets people for me saying that, but there are things happening that I don't like. I love what's happening with crime. As a matter of fact, in Illinois, speaking of Illinois, we have the Midway Blitz. And what's happening in that situation? Let's see here. As a matter of fact, I just read about this Midway Blitz, 1,500 arrests so far in the Midway Blitz. Yes, we're knocking out crime. We're sending our National Guard out into these cities who need it most. So that's a really big deal. I'm very happy with what Trump and his administration is doing with crime. I love what they're doing with our military. They're recommissioning all these different groups to start building more weapons, building more missiles, making sure that our service members are paid during this government shutdown. That's a really fantastic thing. But sometimes I do think that Donald Trump gets bad advice. And the reason why I say that, and you guys probably may or may not recall this, and I had interviewed a man. I don't even know if I can remember that guy's name now. His name was Robert. I met him, if you guys can recall, when I was working with the Greitens campaign, Eric Greitens campaign in Missouri, setting up helped set up a fundraiser and different things like that, getting the word out and so on back when I was with Real Talk. Well, I interviewed a guy at that time. I just wish I could remember his last name. His name was Robert. He had been one of Donald Trump's advisors during his first term. And he told me, privately, but he did tell me that, and I interviewed him on Real Talk. He said that unfortunately, some people did get to Donald Trump. They did get in his inner circle. He did trust these people and they were giving him bad advice. So that's the only reason why I'm saying that. I'm just not speculating. This is somebody that was told to me by someone who was part of Donald Trump's administration in that first term. Ronna McDaniel, I think, who was the chairperson for the RNC, who I've never liked her. I've never wanted anything to do with her or the RNC for that matter, quite honestly, that she brought some people into his circle that maybe weren't giving him the best advice. And so now I do worry, who's giving him advice? Why is he bringing Qatar into our country? Why is he working on all these peace deals when we desperately, desperately need help here in our own country? There's got to be people advising Donald Trump who's saying, okay, Americans can no longer afford to eat beef. What are you going to do about it? Nothing's happening. Americans are struggling every day. And I notice it, I'm sure you guys do too, is that the sad part is that I'm seeing a lot of suicides take place. And I shouldn't say that, unalivings. I don't know what word to use. I've got to be careful because I don't want to get banned for saying these things. Look at it right here in our own area. How much is going on? How many people have jumped off St. Louis area bridges in the past 6 months? I'm going to tell you, it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm reading these stories at least every week. How many people are taking their own lives because they don't know what else to do? It's a lot. Every day we have people who live very comfortably, just like you and I do. And then the next thing they know, they're out on the streets. We've got to start doing more. We've got to start doing more here in our own borders, in our own country, for our own people. I think we absolutely have to support Israel, but we have to support humanity in general. We just have to start concentrating on our country here, and I feel like that's never going to happen. And Mr. Parnot deleting themselves. Thank you. It's hard to find the right word without getting in trouble. Brenda says, "Oh, you are seeing it on the news now." Yeah, I knew it would make its way there eventually. And Lori, I love that you are not blind. Trump fan, I agree with you. You can be a supporter and still not agree with everything. As much as there are sheep on the other side, there are those Trump supporters that say he can do no wrong. He is what America needed, but there is room for more improvement, or what America needs, but more room for more improvement. I agree, Lori, and thank you for agreeing with me. I don't follow anyone blindly. I've always said that. I don't follow anyone blindly. There are some absolutely fantastic things Donald Trump is doing. And I've lost followers who expect me to agree with every single decision he makes, every decision. They're saying, oh no, if he did it, he's got the best advice, he's got the best intentions, everything about him is perfect. And I don't agree with that. He's a man just like the rest of us. And I've had the privilege of meeting him before, and I was very happy to have been able to do that. Of course, I worked very hard, very, very hard to get him elected. And as a matter of fact, very hard. I gave up everything, including, hiring other people or having my employees work for me when I was out of town, for those 42 days in Georgia to get out the early vote for Donald Trump. But a lot of the things he campaigned on, we're not seeing it. I'm glad that he's trying to work out this deal for peace in all these other countries. Fantastic. But what about us? What about the people here who are struggling every day? When are we going to see lower food prices? I just got my Ameren bill this morning. I was actually surprised it was as low as it was. $995. $995. That's insane. That's a month where I pretty much had no air conditioning or heat on. Because why? Because my utility bill, like so many other people, has risen by 60%. And why is this happening? Why isn't anyone doing anything about it? Here in the town that I'm in, we're in the middle of a water crisis. We get our water from a lake, and that lake is drying up because we're in the middle kind of a very dry spell in my area. People in the town are worried. Where are we going to get our water? And we're not the only ones. There's a lot of other people. Thank God I have a well system, and it's just a matter of switching things around to have the well water, come in the house. Thankfully, to whoever set that system up. And thankfully, my neighbors have the same system. But I'll tell you, we're living in some tough times. People cannot afford. They just cannot afford to survive. And because they can't afford to survive, we've got a lot of Americans running around and being very stressed. And I know some of you who listen to the show are some of those people too. People, and please always feel free to send me messages or contact me. I've gotten countless messages from people who listen to the show who say, I am one of those people. I am really having a hard time. I'm trying to keep the faith, but I'm struggling every day, and I don't feel like anyone cares. In fact, some people are telling me they're paying more for groceries now than what they did under Biden's term. Yes, the price of eggs might be lower, the price of gas might be a little bit lower, but everything else is higher. And people are struggling, with drug addiction, with mental health conditions. And I know the Trump administration is working on the mental health situation. I know they are. They want to bring back the asylums, which I hate to say that word, but it needs to be done. That is a positive for us because, people who cannot take care of themselves do need to be taken care of. And I am in favor of forcefully taking care of these people. If they are not within sound mind to take care of themselves, then we have to take them off the streets and make sure they are cared for because they become victims on the streets. Some people think they're the perpetrator of crimes when in fact they're usually the victims of crimes. So we've got to do what we can to help those people. But I'm so tired of seeing these different scenes of drug addicts strung out all over city streets, hunched over, laying in the street, shooting up drugs right on camera. And there's not a darn thing we are doing about it. Why? Because no one can make money on it. There's no one that can make money off of the homeless. There's nobody who can make money off of drug addicts. There's no profit to be made. So therefore, we turn a blind eye. And it's really unfortunate that that's the case. But I want to see the Trump administration step up and do something. And yes, it's going to violate the constitutional rights of a lot of people. And I am perfectly fine with that. If you're strung out in the street and you're shooting up whatever drugs or taking fentanyl or heroin and you're living in the streets, you're one of these people who's hunched over on our city streets, yes, they need to come around, they need to round you up, and they need to take you to a treatment facility and they need to hold you there until you have received the appropriate treatment. And then once you've gotten past withdrawals and you want to change your life around, if that ever happens, then you can be released back into the streets or in the care of your family. And I know a lot of people are not going to agree with this. And I'll tell you what, another thing that we need to tackle in this country is people having children that shouldn't have children. How many videos have you seen? Because there's so much on the internet. I just watched a video yesterday of a woman drugged out of her mind, pregnant, carrying a baby. She didn't know if the baby was alive or dead. She had no idea. Somebody called checking on the welfare of the child. Thank God the child was alive, but barely. And thank God there were resources there. Why does this woman have children? Why are people allowed to be on drugs, roaming our streets when they're pregnant and having babies? And I know people don't want to talk about forced sterilization. I'm in favor of forced sterilization. I really am. And I know that's a slippery slope. I've talked about it before on other shows. People get very upset when I say it. But you know what? Not everyone should be able to have the privilege of having a child. It's not about money. I'm not saying poor people shouldn't have children. I'm not saying uneducated people shouldn't have children. That's not the case. Drug addicts should not be able to have children. Absolutely, 100% not. People with mental health issues, serious, violent mental health issues, should not be allowed to have children. I just read a story just this morning, and it's kind of set me off on this tangent today. And maybe you read it too, about a man and wife keeping their two little girls, 4 and 6 years old, in a dirt chamber in the backyard. The little 4-year-old girl died, and the 6-year-old little girl they were sexually abusing. These people should have never had children, but yet they did. So sorry if it upsets anyone, but I'm tired of seeing what's taking place with our children. People trafficking their own children. I just read a story yesterday about a woman who sold her daughter for $200 to get some meth. And they showed video of her. She rented a hotel room. She had her little girl, 12 years old. I mean, this wasn't a child. She was 12 years old. And they show the man who purchased this little girl leaving. You guys may have seen this video too, leaving the hotel room, carrying this little girl. He gets in the elevator. She's never seen again until they find her body, sexually abused and horrifically killed on the side of a road. For $200, this mom sold her daughter. I'm tired of it. I really am. I don't care if I lose followers or not. These people should not be allowed to have children. You should have to take parenting classes before you have children. It's not about money, not about education, not about where you live. It's about the fact that you should have to take a parenting class before you can have a child. I'm so sick of seeing all of the abuse that's taking place. It makes me sick. Mary says, offer it free. Mary, I'm not sure. Are you talking about offer maybe sterilization for free? Maybe. I don't, the problem with that goes, and people have presented this to me in the past, is if you don't want these people to have children, how do you keep them from having children? How do you force them into a sterilization situation, or how do you force them to get, to take birth control or so on? And I don't have the answers for that. Well, I do have the answers for that, but I'm not going to say them here. I do have an answer, but better off left unsaid. You can leave it to your imagination. I am perfectly fine with forcefully removing people on from our streets who are either so addicted to drugs they have no idea what world they live in, or people who are so mentally ill that they cannot care for themselves. I have no problem with it. And I'm also perfectly fine with removing homeless people from the streets if we put them into a facility in which they actually get good care. And I'm not talking about a lot of our homeless shelters where they put other homeless people in charge and everybody just gets abused on a regular basis. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a government ran facility where these people are treated with decency and respect, a lot like a nursing home for people that just have no choice. Because you know what? In America, we shouldn't have people living on our streets homeless. We shouldn't have children living on our streets homeless. We shouldn't have elderly living on our streets homeless. We shouldn't have blocks and blocks of people addicted to drugs shooting up on our city streets. None of that should happen in America, but instead, we're so worried about what's going on in the rest of the world. We don't care about what's happening here. We don't care about the fact that elderly people can't afford to have health care and electricity and food, but that's a really real problem. And I know it's a real problem. It's a real problem. I just read a story the other day, a very unfortunate story. And I obviously spent a lot of time researching these things, as you know, but I was reading another horrific story. And yes, there are good stories out there too, of course. But I was reading a story about a man who ended up homeless and died on the streets because he was in some type of, it was a domestic situation. He was in a relationship, and when he left, they would not give him his medication. He was on insulin for type 1 diabetes, and of course insulin has to be kept in the refrigerator. His girlfriend or whatever kicked him out. Yes, the guy had problems, she had problems, they both had problems and had kids on top of that, and she kicked him out into the streets. Of course, the police came and they wouldn't do anything about it. They said that it's a civil matter. They cannot force her to give him his medication. And sure enough, that guy died like 24 hours later. I'm just sick of the world. I really am. I'm sick of humanity and how people treat each other. I don't understand it, and I think we need to focus a lot more on it, as hard as these stories are to hear. Good morning, Evangelist Shiza. And yes, Mary, it is. There's so many. I hate to even concentrate on these things or talk about anything, so I'm going to move on to something else. But I'm in a very bad way the past few days, seeing these things that are going on, knowing what's happening in our country. And I really thought we had some salvation with the Trump administration and helping Americans who need it the most. But I'm not seeing that yet. I'm just not seeing it yet. And it's very upsetting to me. But I still support Donald Trump. I'm still going to work hard to keep him in office, and whoever's next on the list, hopefully JD Vance. I'm going to work very hard to make sure he also gets to sit in that seat. And I thought it was kind of funny. You guys may have seen him trolling Elizabeth Warren. She made a post about the peace deal between, of course, Israel and Gaza. She never mentioned Donald Trump's name, but JD Vance, he replied back to it, something about Donald Trump specifically signing the peace deal on Indigenous Peoples Day just for her. And I thought that was funny because JD Vance trolls people as bad as Donald Trump does. And I think it's absolutely hilarious. And I love him for his trolling. That's one of my favorite things about Donald Trump as well, is that he likes to troll people. And I love the videos that Donald Trump puts out there. They're absolutely hilarious. So those are some things to talk about. Newsom banning the sale of Glock weapons in the state of California. California is a mess. I mean, it really is. California is a mess. Dottie says, Maha needs to address the drugged out people on the streets. Yes, they do. Mary says, sometimes I have to take a news break and watch something light on TV. I know, Mary, I don't even watch TV at all. I don't watch the news at all. But I read, and if you're on social media, you see some of these stories and some of those videos, and it's absolutely just heartbreaking. Now, we've got to be careful, though. You don't want to go too far. what was his name? I don't know right now if I can recall his name. He was the president in the Philippines for a time. And his way of handling drug addiction, it was very extreme. And we don't want to go that far, is he was sending his people, his government people out to the streets, and they would shoot them on sight. If you were on drugs, you're dead. There was no arresting, no going to jail, no treatment. His philosophy was you just kill them where they stand. We don't want to go that far. So I'm not advocating for anything quite that extreme. And now, of course, he's facing prison time over those decisions that he made. And good morning, Thomas Lyons, Tommy. And so, anyway, California is an absolute disaster. A lot of people talking about how they got recently caught. They have that Prop 50 going on. I can't even recall right now what Prop 50 was about. Probably something about climate change. Who knows? And what they had been doing is they had the ballots, but the ballots, right where somebody would either say yes on one side or no on one side, they had a hole punched through the envelope. So California voters who are voting on Prop 50, when they sent in their vote, the vote talliers or the whoever collected it, could be the post office for all that matters. They could very easily see if somebody was voting yes or no. So a lot of people think that they got rid of the votes based on those people through the envelope. You can't do that. You can't punch a hole in an envelope for the entire world to see whether you voted yes or no on a certain proposition. And so California in the hot seat over that right now. Another weird thing that Newsom is doing, he just wrote into law that social media, let's say Facebook, for example, if you have a social media account and you decide today you don't want to be on social media anymore, and so you delete your account. Well, in California now, social media, they have to erase all of your digital footprint within that social media. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. If I delete my account on Facebook, that means, yeah, I'm done. Delete all my information, all my history, all my posts. But it makes me wonder, does he have a personal reason for writing this into law? Because it's kind of a strange law, quite honestly. And so in California, again, if you have a social media account and you delete that account, by law now in California, if and when this passes, then that social media platform will have to delete all of your information within the account. They cannot retain any data about you at all. And it makes me wonder, maybe in one of his old accounts, did he post some stuff or maybe some private messages back when we thought our messaging was private that he doesn't want anyone to see? Seems kind of personal to me. And Jay says the California gun law will eventually be overturned. It falls into the same category with the Illinois ban. I agree, Jay. It's not going to go far, but you know what? They sure give it a good try, don't they? They sure give it a good try. Something else going on in California, and this is really happening all across the country, but more so in California, because you know what? In California, just like some other states like Florida, a lot of non-citizens, illegals, were able to get a CDL license to drive their, trucks over the road to deliver, of course, goods across the country. Well, now what they're finding specifically in California is a very large number of illegals are going in to renew their CDLs and they're not being renewed. It is not happening. They're turning them away, saying, no, if you cannot prove your citizenship, we cannot renew your CDL. I was kind of surprised that was happening in California. But on the other flip side of that, what we got to remember, what happens when we have a shortage of truck drivers? Oh, I mean, it's a very serious issue. And I'm not saying that we need to give illegals a CDL. We absolutely should not, unless there's a reason for them to be here and they're paying taxes and they're taking the correct, courses to receive a CDL. They absolutely should not be out driving. If they can't read and write English, just like the Trump administration said, they absolutely should not be out driving. How many accidents have we seen, over the past couple of years where we have people who don't speak English and can't read the signs that end up killing people? Happens all the time. And not to mention that it doesn't happen in other situations too, but it does happen for those reasons also. But what we've got to fear is a shortage in our truck drivers. It's happening all across the country, where if you pull into a way stop, as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, you pull into a way stop and your way stop employee, I don't even know what their terms of their jobs are, their titles are, but you pull in, you're getting your truck weighed. Well, there's an official that comes out and he wants to see your logbook. He wants to see your license. And then he finds out, hey, you are not you can't read or write English, guess what? You're not driving that truck out of that weigh facility. B, if you're not a citizen of the United States, you're not driving that truck out of that facility. And so that's happening all across the country. And what is it going to do? Is it going to lead to a shortage of truck drivers? Is it going to start causing problems, delivering goods and making sure our stores are stocked? It's kind of tough to know right now. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm going to play a very quick video clip of her. She touches base on this. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene is going against what her fellow Republicans are wanting to do. She thinks that people who are here illegally, people who have not committed a crime outside of entering the country illegally, people who are not violent, they're not pedophiles, they've not been accused of theft or any other crime, that those people should be able to stay in the country and they should be able to continue to work because our labor force needs them. So we're going to play that. And let's see here. Jay says, Bruin versus New York has already set a precedent. It's being dragged out, and the Supreme Court is waiting on rulings from other cases. I'm assuming you're talking about gun law. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, and we're going to talk about, do you or do you not agree with her? Should we fast track potentially some people who are in our country illegally? Yes, they came here illegally. That alone in itself is a crime. But again, they're not pedophiles. They don't belong in prison. Well, maybe some people do think they belong in prison if they came here illegally. But should we not deport these people? You'll hear what she says here.
As a conservative and as a business owner in the construction industry and as a realist, I can say we have to do something about labor, and that needs to be a smarter plan than just rounding up every single person and deporting them just like that. Right. So, and I'm going to get pushback on that, but it's, yeah. I'm just living in reality from here on out. Yeah. And if anybody's mad at me for saying the truth, then I'm sorry.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, ladies and gentlemen, our next.
So what do you think? I don't think I love Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is not going to be our next president. But I do like her a lot. And I'll tell you, I agree with a lot of what she's saying here. And I've always said this is not, something new coming from me. I've been saying it for years, is that if somebody is here, yes, illegally, yes, they came here the wrong way. But a lot of people we know, they come here. There are people who genuinely do come to this country, even if they do so illegally, to have a better life. Some people truly are escaping a bad situation, and they come here to our country trying to better their lives. You can say whatever you want about that. Some people absolutely will not agree with me, and I understand your viewpoint also. But maybe we should have a program to fast track people. Or maybe we should do what we're doing right now and deport all of these people, have them go back through the legal port of entry, apply for asylum, and then fast track them without all of the crazy fees. A lot of people can't afford to come to the United States the legal way because they cannot afford to pay for it. They don't want to wait, 6 months to a year, whatever the wait might be, sometimes longer. But I've also heard a lot of people pay a lot more money to be brought here illegally. Some people, of course, just walk across unimpeded. So therefore, we've got a lot of different scenarios there. But I don't have a problem with taking people who are here in our country illegally, who have not committed any crimes other than entering illegally, fast tracking them through the process. They have to become American citizens. If somebody's going to stay and they're going to be here, part of our workforce, they have to become American citizens. We cannot have people here entering our country illegally and continuing to work in our country. They have to become American citizens. They have to pay taxes. They have to be productive members of society. And I'm okay with that. But if somebody's here illegally, they have committed crimes. Well, these folks in Illinois that have been arrested, I think, 1,500 arrests being made in the Midway Blitz. Absolutely. All of them serious offenders, violent offenders, pedophiles, people who have been committed sexual assault, people who have been committed armed robbery, and so on. Very violent offenders. Jay says they paid thousands to cross the border illegally. Most of them did, Jay. There are some people who make it across without paying, but most of the time they have to pay. From what I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand is there are places along the border where you can cross over without a cartel member, but there's very few and far between. And I've heard that's very difficult terrain if you cross in those areas. If you cross in the areas where we visibly see people, we see them on videos, that you're being guided by a cartel member. And even if you don't see that cartel member, they're on the other side, allowing you safe passage. And somehow they give people, I've heard different things that these people have, where if you get stopped crossing and they say, hey, who did you pay? Who allowed you to cross into the United States? That they have to show them something to show that, yes, this person, I did pay my fee to this person, blah, 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 and I have the right to cross. And yes, it's much more expensive than it is to go the legal route into the United States. And Jay says, Pritzker wants to protect the criminals more than the citizens. You've got that right. And it's really sad that that's the case, but it absolutely is. Margie says, what is the process for obtaining a green card? It depends, Margie, on where you're coming from. There's a lot of people who can apply for a green card if they are escaping asylum. They can apply for a green card if they're coming here to work. We also have the the H-1 visa, of course. They're definitely not my area of expertise. But let's just say that come up our northern corridor, and they come up and of course marriage. That's a good way. We have a lot of people in this country who are being bought, I should say, to marry somebody so that the person can come in and get a green card. If you marry a citizen, then they will usually 99% of the time give you a green card. So that's one way I'm hearing a lot of people are coming over, especially from Somalia and some of those different areas over in Africa. Now, as far as people, let's say, coming up our northern border, what they should do legally is they should go to a legal port of entry. They apply for asylum. They are not allowed to cross over while they wait. They have to go back either to their home or sometimes they have some camps set up that Donald Trump set up while they wait for their asylum. And now Donald Trump in his last term did try to kind of fast track that asylum process a little bit, but there's no guarantee that they can come in. They have to be able to prove that they're fleeing a situation, that they're not criminals. We have to do background checks. They have to be vetted. And then they have to pay a fee. I don't know what that fee is to come into our country. Then once they come into our country, they meet with a resettlement coordinator. They get them situated. They talk to them about politics. And of course, it's always a Democrat resettlement coordinator who explains to them that they need to vote Democrat, blah, blah, blah. Then they come into this country and, they're on a green card. They're allowed to stay for so long. And then they have to go back, or if they're granted permanent asylum, then they can come in and become a United States citizen. Now, I'm not 100% on all of that. Again, that is not my area of expertise by any means. But it's not easy. And that's why people do come across. It's not easy. Most people are denied, quite honestly. And so very few are legally allowed to come into our country. So it's much easier for them to just save up a life savings, save up a lot of money, give it to the cartel, and come over illegally. Most people cannot afford to come over the legal route. And most importantly, most people are denied. Most people are denied. You have to have a good reason to come to the United States to work, to get married, to do something else productive to obtain that green card, or be, of course, seeking asylum. And again, somebody else out there might have a better answer than me. I don't have a whole lot of time left. Some of the other things I wanted to talk about just a little bit. I've been keeping an eye, by the way, about that ceasefire. The ceasefire violation that took place this morning was the first thing I talked about when I came on the show this morning. I know a lot of other people have jumped in and joined us since then. And I will read it to you once again because I still have it here. The Israel Defense Forces said its troops opened fire on Palestinians, killing 5 after they allegedly violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement. From what I understand, and since I have been on this show, I have not been able to go out and watch any news clips. Maybe you guys have seen it. At the time I talked about it, I guess it hadn't even been in the news yet. But I had a really good source that sent me that information. And from what I understand, they opened fire on a group of people. I'm not sure how many. I'm hearing dozens. And there may have been other injuries, but 5 Palestinians were killed. And I don't know, once again, just to kind of give that update, I don't know if they consider this just a violation of the ceasefire or if it ends the peace agreement altogether. Can they get back on track? Or does this violate the peace agreement now? We've got to start all over again. Now that I do not know. Margie says, thanks for the insight. Margie, I'm not really sure if that was good insight because I'm just kind of recalling things from back when I used to talk about that more. But I don't recall all of it. Now, 2 more things I really want to talk about before we head out today is we've talked so much about the comets. 3i Atlas, we have Swan, we have Lemon. And I think some of you are going to find this interesting, probably Jay, you the most, is that lemon, you should be able to see lemon now very faintly, and particularly if you have a good telescope. But you can catch lemon, they say about an hour after the sun goes down, after sunset, and it's going to be right around the range of the Big Dipper. It's either off a little bit to the right of the Big Dipper or down and around, depending on when you look. And they say October 17th is going to be the best day for viewing Comet Lemon. It's just starting to come into view right now. They say it's very faint. Some people saw it yesterday, very, very faint right now. But as we approach October 17th, it's going to become a lot more visible, where you'll be able to see it up there again by the Big Dipper. Now, there's no conspiracy theories around Comet Lemon. It is just a comet. I've heard no one say anything different about it, that it is just a comet. And same with Swan. Swan has not approached quite close enough for us to see yet. But Swan, again, I haven't heard any conspiracy theories about Swan. Again, just another comet. But Swan is allegedly 100 times larger than 3I Atlas, but I have not heard anything unusual about it. From what I understand, all the astrophysicists think it looks just like your average comet, nothing strange with Swan. Some people refer to it as R2 Swan or 2025 Swan. Now, here is where things get a little weird, is that I'm hearing on October 30th, we're going to reach our solar max. And that means our sun is going to be the hottest it's been in 20 years. So and most volatile it's been in 20 years. So we've been in the solar max for quite a while now, where it's been the most volatile, let's say, in 11 years. But on October 30th, it's a special day. There's probably a name for it. Jay probably knows what it is. I do not. And it's going to be its most volatile in 20 days. Now, what's interesting about this is if you listen to a lot of these folks out there talking about the various comets, especially 3I Atlas, they're going to tell you that, hey, on October 30th, not only is that the solar maximum, the hottest day in 20 years, the most volatile day for the sun in 20 years, so we can expect a lot of solar flares, solar storms on that day. But more importantly, they're also saying that these three comets are going to come together. Now, last week I talked about these three comets coming together at the same time, nearest to our sun. So I didn't realize that also coincided with the most volatile day, our solar maximum at that time. I did not know that. So what they're saying now is that Lemon, Swan, and 3I Atlas are all going to come very close together. All three of them will be approaching the sun at their closest point, all on October 30th. It's kind of weird that all of these things are happening on the exact same day. And so, of course, people are wondering, well, what's going to happen on that day? How is the solar maximum being on that day going to affect these comets? And I haven't heard any other conspiracy theories over 3I Atlas. And trust me, I have been watching. The last one I heard was about how the 3I Atlas was filled with ice. And as it approaches the sun, it's behind the sun right now where no one can really see it. As it was approaching, it was spewing out water that was condensating. And people were saying, well, that's really unusual and really weird that they could see that. But then also on the flip side of that, how can they see that? We can't even see the comet anymore. Let's see. Nancy says today would have been Charlie Kirk's birthday. Oh, Nancy, I did not know that. I saw that they were posthumously awarding him with the Medal of Freedom. I did not know that, Nancy. Well, happy birthday to Charlie Kirk. Such a loss for us all, that's for sure. So keep an eye on October 30th, the solar maximum. If you want to take a look at Comet Lemon, once again, you can do that today about an hour after sunset. If you look up towards the Big Dipper, I like it because the Big Dipper is one of the constellations I never have a problem picking out. So that's good. And the last thing I want to talk about, and some of you may not care about this, which is why I put it at the end of the show, is I've been doing research on that situation in Houston. I told you guys I would talk about that. If you look at Houston, there's a lot of bayous in the Houston area. And there have been, we're told, 53 bodies that have been found within those bayous and over the past, since 2023. Now, local investigators say that the cases aren't related. It's not a serial killer. And I will tell you, it's very difficult to find information on the victims. I have done research. I have found as much information as I can. And it does appear that the women, so far, the only victims I've found are women. Now, there may be some men, if so, I haven't come across those cases yet. But all of the women that I saw were either, and no surprise here, sadly, but they were either people known to use drugs, people that have various offenses that have been arrested, people who are women who are known for prostitution. Now, what that opens up, in my opinion, though, is a much more of a case, quite honestly, that the cases might be tied together. Kind of reminds me of the Green River killer. If you recall the Green River killer, he preyed upon women who were drug addicts and prostitutes, and or one or the other, and he dumped them in the same body of water, which was the Green River. That was up in Washington State. And so, it to me, not knowing, of course, all the facts, just preliminary investigation into this case. And of course, as some of you know, I've written a crime blog for many years. I've been too busy to do it lately, but this would be something I would normally write about had I had the time to do so. So, in what little free time I have, I've been trying to look into the victims, and I really hope investigators do a better job. And I'm not saying they're not doing a good job, but they don't seem to be piecing these cases together. And I'll tell you, right here, if you're in this area, in East St. Louis, there is a serial killer who's been active, and he has been killing women who are, again, involved in drugs and prostitution. It's not unusual for a serial killer to target those types of people. There's also a situation in, I believe, it's also in Texas, and it's called Lady Bird Lake. And there have been a number of gay men who have been killed and found in Lady Bird Lake. And what's interesting about that case is there was a man who worked as a bartender, and he was serving a regular customer one night. This customer had a lot to drink, and the guy was talking to him about something. I don't recall what it was. And the guys piped up. I think the guy was talking about going to the lake the next day. And the regular customer said, "Oh, yeah, I've been," and I apologize for saying this word, but I'm just repeating what the witness stated. He said, "Oh, yeah, I've been killing homos at the lake for however long now." And the bartender was really taken aback. They knew this person had had a lot to drink, but they took him very seriously. They reported to police. Investigators never got back to him. He called in a tip. No one ever called him back. And of course, this regular customer never came back again. And, I don't know if he knew the guy's name. I'm assuming he did not. He just knew he was somebody that came in. And trust me, bartending back in the day, you don't know your customers' names all the time. You might know their first name, but you might see somebody come in every day and have no idea what their name is. And I really hope that somebody goes back and takes a better look at that case. But there's a lot of these types of cases. And like I told you guys yesterday, I was going to touch base on the smiley face killer. There's a lot of people who believe, well, first of all, let me start out with this. The smiley face killer began, the rumors began of these cases being connected together because there was a large number of, and I do mean a large number of men, typically young men, sometimes college age men, sometimes just out of college age men, and they're found in different rivers, lakes, streams, and no apparent cause of death from what I understand. And nearby, they'll see a smiley face drawn, written. If you go online and look up smiley face killer, you'll see all types of images that have the smiley face on them that are left at these areas where these young men have been found. Now, there's a lot of speculation about that. Now, and these cases are taking place all across the country, and more so on the East Coast, but it's taking place all across the country. There's even been some cases in Nashville, are probably the closest cases that I'm aware of, but there are probably a lot of cases that are related to this smiley face killer situation that are even attributed to it. Because some people say, well, eventually they stopped leaving behind the smiley face because they didn't want to get caught. Now, there's a lot of rumors out there that this is actually some type of secret underground club, and the initiation is to take a man out, or see a man in a bar and give him a drug, and then watch him, follow him home or wherever he's going, and push him into a body of water, to where he drowns. He's, drugged, inebriated. And some people talk about how maybe they slipped drugs into that person's drink throughout the night, followed them, put them in the body of water where they drown because obviously they're in a very bad state. Now, there's too many of these cases for it to be one person. There's far too many. Unless it's a business person that travels all over the country and they go out just for the kicks and they go into a bar and they target people. We always think of women, being in that situation where we're very vulnerable. We don't watch our drink. Some guy could come by, slip something in our drink, take advantage of us. But the smiley face killers, this is happening to men, to young men. And I tell my son all the time, if you go out, make sure, I don't care if you're drinking a glass of water, make sure you keep an eye on your drink, because he is right at that age where a lot of these men, are being found, and you don't know. It's happening all over the place. And I think there has to be a lot more to it. Is it, some type of secret society group? Possibly. It possibly is. A lot of these men are not gay, but there are rumors anyway that more of them are than there are not. But to me, the cases that I've looked at just look like your typical guy, usually nice looking men, quite honestly, usually intelligent men. They go out, they have a drink or drinks, somehow they get drugged, and then they end up dead in a body of water. Now, there have been some men who also have been through this and claimed that they survived. They didn't see anyone, nothing happened to them, but they went to a club, they were drinking. Somehow somebody put something into their drink. They don't know how they got home or ended up where they did, but somehow did manage to survive. A couple reported somebody following them, people acting suspicious near them. So there's definitely more to this story. And Lori, I'm glad you said that, because that was where I was going next. The Mizzou student in Nashville. I hadn't really thought about that, or even planned to talk about him today. And I can't recall his name. Was it Riley? Oh yeah, thank you, Riley. Riley, yeah, same here. I can't remember Riley's last name, but I followed that case very closely. And there are a lot of people who believe, and this again is more, you could call it conspiracy talk if you want. There are a lot of people who do believe that Riley was a victim of the smiley face killer. And the reason why they believe that is because that he was at a bar with a bunch of friends in Nashville, and he's one of many men who is believed to potentially be a victim of the smiley face killer, but they haven't been able to connect the dots. And he's one of three men in Nashville that this happened to, where they were at a bar, were seen afterwards extremely intoxicated, and once again ended up in a body of water where there's no foul play. They don't show any injuries to his body, but yet somehow inebriated, he fell into a body of water and perished. And in the case of Riley, if you guys followed that case, it was absolutely heartbreaking. He was a Mizzou student traveling with his fraternity to Nashville. They're all out, they're all having a good time. He ends up leaving. The bartender, from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understand, the bartender said, okay, you've had enough. We cannot serve you any more liquor. And it's unfortunate that, his friends didn't leave with him, but he left the bar. Now, his friends say he really didn't drink that much. There'd be no reason for him to be as intoxicated as he was. But in the city of Nashville, there's cameras everywhere. So there's a lot of video of Riley literally stumbling through town, being caught on cameras, walking here and there. At one point, he has vomited because there's vomited on his shirt. Somehow, a homeless person ended up being in possession of the shirt he had vomited on. And now that homeless person is not a suspect. They're not a person of interest, but they claim that they found the shirt hanging on a post. And they thought, oh, it's a shirt. I'm homeless. I'm going to take that shirt and keep it. It was a nice, white dress shirt. And so they took his shirt and kept it, and they did retrieve it. Other homeless people knew this person had it. Now, you can watch the video. You can see Riley's last moment, the last time he was caught on camera. And just a few feet later is where there is a bridge that goes over, is it the Cumberland River that goes over the river? And they believe that's where maybe he fell in. Now, he was very tall. If you guys recall, I think he was maybe 6'4", 6'5", something like that. Some people believe that he may have gotten too close to the railing and was vomiting and tumbled over and fell into the river. A lot of other people think he was pushed. There were a lot of people around him that day riding bicycles. There was a car that's driven by, a couple of different times. A lot of people speculate that somebody slipped something into his drink, and that's why he was so incredibly intoxicated. They said that it was not like him to be stumbling around, and people who saw him walking and what we saw in video, he even fell at one time because he was so incredibly intoxicated. And so that leaves you to that question, was he drugged? Or did he just drink too much and end up in a very bad situation? And sadly, that's what the case is with all these smiley face victims, or victims who are potentially attributed to the smiley face. It's not like the case in the Houston Bayous where the victims are, connected to prostitution or drugs or runaways and that type of situation. It's very different than that. These are educated men. A lot of them are in college. A lot of them have good jobs. They're all nice looking men. And again, I don't believe the rumor that connects them to the LGBTQ community, because some of the victims I've read, that is just not the case. They're just guys out with their friends, out by themselves, have a drink, and then the next thing you know, they're found in a body of water. So, there's no suspects, from what I understand, in any of the smiley face killer cases. There's no suspects in the Houston Bayou cases. There is a suspect in the Ladybird case, but nobody knows who it is. And obviously, investigators appearingly not taking it very seriously. But trust me, just because you're a male, don't think that you cannot become a victim. Do not think you can't. If indeed this is a case where there is a secret society involved, then these people could be anywhere. They could be fanned out anywhere across the country. And it's pretty scary to think that we would have a secret society here in the United States operating in this way. But I can't name any names, but I've talked to some people about, all of these cases, particularly the smiley face case. And somebody I know who does work for the government, they do believe that it is multiple people committing these crimes, all with the smiley face logo. So there is definitely something strange going on here. So please, if you're a male, if you have, male children, family members, make sure they know. Men, I don't think take it very seriously. If you're out, a male, and you're under, let's say, 40 years old, make sure you cover your drink. Make sure you watch the people around you. Be situationally aware. As Colonel Joe Adams would say, keep an eye on people follow you. It's not just for women. Men have to follow these same safety rules. And if I hear anything more about any of these cases, of course, I will provide an update. For me, it's pretty fascinating to think about. Of course, I, again, wrote that crime blog for a long time. So these types of cases that are unsolved fascinate me, because somewhere out there in our country, maybe somebody you've come across, is committing these crimes. And it's a pretty sad situation. The FBI, like I said yesterday, at one time, I need to get some updated information on this. At one time, they said there were 50 serial killers operating at any given time in the United States. And some of that percentage of them are truck drivers, because guess what? As a matter of fact, where I am right now, where I stand, just a couple miles out, there was a victim of one of the very serious truck driver serial killers, where he left her body in a barn not far from here. It's a pretty famous case, actually, and it's absolutely terrifying. But what better, occupation for a serial killer than to drive a semi truck, right? Where you're always place to place. It's a lot harder now because of cameras, than it was back in the day. So I would expect that not to be the best profession. If any of you are into cases, by the way, a case that I wrote a lot about is, his name is Neal Falls, Neall Falls. And I'm not going to go on about this because I know I've been talking way too long today, but it's a very interesting case. Neal Falls, what's so interesting about him is that he was killed by a victim. He was going around, answering these back page, what do they call it? Craigslist ads. And so he went to this woman's house, who was a known prostitute, went to her home. And as soon as she opened the door, he already had his weapon out. And I can't recall what he said to her. It was like, you choose. Do you want to live or do you want to die? He got into the house. Of course, he was armed. And in their struggle, she managed to get his gun and shoot him. And whenever the investigators came out, in the back of his, I believe he was driving some type of a station wagon, but in the back, or small SUV, in the back of his vehicle, they found shovels and gloves and ropes and restraints and all kinds of other stuff. But what's so interesting about Neal Falls is two things, and why I find his case fascinating, is that one is that no one knew who he was. He was completely unknown. The only known photo of Neal Falls was his driver's license. That was it. There was nothing else. He had no credit cards. He used cash for all of his purchases. And what's really wild is that at one time he worked at the Hoover Dam, and people who worked with him, I'm sure you guys know, sometimes they're just people who give off a creepy vibe. And that was the case with Neal Falls. He gave off that creepy vibe. And there's a Facebook page out there. I don't know if it's still in existence, because I haven't talked about this case in a couple of years, but there was a Facebook page out there about the Neal Falls case. And on this page, there were people who knew him at work, who worked with him at the Hoover Dam, who would talk about him. And they even joked, he would go on his lunch break and he would drive out to the desert, and then people he worked with would joke, "Oh, he's out there burying bodies," when in fact he actually was. And some investigators think he's probably one of the U.S.'s most prolific serial killers. They have since tied numerous cases to him. Probably there will be many more if those bodies are ever found. And as you know, whenever the lake went down out there, they were finding and recovering a lot of bodies. You know, when you're out in the desert, who knows? But this guy was really creepy. They found a black book that he kept where he had listed people he wanted to kill that he worked with, people he knew in the community that he wanted to get rid of. And he like sat around during his lunch breaks and killed bugs and stuff. Very weird behavior. But anyway, enough of that. You know, one of these days we're going to talk about Thomas Bruce, who of course is a person who killed the three women at the Catholic store. We definitely need to talk about that sometime soon. Or let me backtrack on that. He attacked the three people at the Catholic store. So we'll talk about that another day. I have kept you enough time today. I think that's all I've got to go over. Lots of things will be, oh, you know what? There won't be a lot of things we're going to talk about tomorrow. I almost forgot. I will not be here tomorrow. And I may or may not be here Thursday. You know, what's interesting is I work in anti-piracy. And a lot of times we don't know what we're going to be doing until they send us the work order. And usually they send me to, you know, at least a week in advance, 3-4 days in advance. But sometimes they send them to me at the very last minute. So last night I got a couple work orders come in, one for tomorrow morning, one for Thursday morning. Now I may end up having somebody cover for me Thursday morning. I'm not sure yet. Tomorrow I cannot because all of our people are already out working on different assignments. I have no choice but to work myself. So I for sure will not be here tomorrow morning. Thursday morning is questionable. I'll post an update on that one way or the other. I will for sure be here on Friday. I do expect to be here next Monday, next Tuesday. I have to go back for my PET scan, so I will not be here next Tuesday morning. Let's see here. Dan says the scary thing is that the proliferation of these smiley face crimes is really due to the copycat syndrome for those seeking notoriety. And you absolutely could be right, Dan. And that is certainly a theory that's been proposed by investigators that sometimes, you know, somebody's committing a crime has absolutely nothing to do with the smiley face killer, but they are copycatting the crime and they're making the smiley face. And that also could be why investigators know these cases are not connected and it's different perpetrators in different situations. And it could also explain why it's happening all across the country and not one specific area. And more so, I think a lot of the cases have been in New Jersey, over on the East Coast, but it's happening all over the place. So thank you, Dan, for bringing that up, because that is absolutely correct, that these crimes could be attributed to copycat killers. Anyway, I will not be here tomorrow. I will maybe or maybe not be here Thursday. I hate missing a show. I really do. Not that I'm telling you any. Oh, now today I told you something you didn't know. I talked about the ceasefire being violated. But anyway, I will see you guys on Friday, no matter what, and then hopefully on Monday and as well on Wednesday. But I will keep everybody updated. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate everyone taking their time out to come and join me, and especially for the comments. I love talking to all of you. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap, and I will look forward to seeing you guys soon. I hope you have a really fantastic day.